Hello everyone, I'm getting on here today to talk about conscious communication. So before I talk a lot about what that is with my guests Kavitha and Kester, I am really excited to talk about this because communication is something that there's our guest. There's obviously a lot of talk about communication in terms of why it should be easy and that we need it in order to have a relationship. But I think one of the things that we often forget is that communication is actually really hard to do in partnership. And so when we talk about conscious communication, we're going to be breaking down what that is, why it's so effective, and how it can actually bring people closer in relationships rather than pushing them apart. So I'll just bring on our guests and I'll go live and Kester right now. Also, hello to my followers, including Samaran. Good morning, Samaran. Hope you're doing well. Hey, Kester and Kavitha, how are you both doing?
Hi.
Doing good. Excited for our live.
Yeah, and I'm excited to have, as I say, it's good to have not one but two guests this time. So I feel like this is going to be a very interesting experience. So as we're getting started, I'd love to hear from both of you who you are, what you're working on, and I suppose what your mission is too.
Yes, one of the first. Yeah.
Okay, so both of us are emotional wellness coaches at Intracresco, which means inner growth in Latin. So at Intracresco, our unique approach to mental health challenges is we focus on emotional wellness and connection. So we believe that a healthy relationship with emotions, a healthy way of expressing emotions, and a healthy way of connecting to other people emotionally is the key to emotional and mental wellness. Yeah, so at Intracresco, what we do is we do advocacy. So we push out information and educational information. We do workshops with groups, corporates, organizations, and we do private sessions with people and families.
Yeah. So you pretty much summarized most of it. Yes.
And can you share also a little bit about who each of you are as well and how you came to Intracresco?
Yeah, so I founded Intracresco about 2-3 years ago, and it kind of spun off of my own journey to find out more about myself. Was going through some challenging life events at that point in time, and I kind of just wanted to find a solution. The things out there didn't give me the solution, even though I went searching for it many years trying to find out what was going on with me. There was this deep sadness inside which just didn't seem to go away. It was just there. It was just there. No matter what I'm doing outside, that sadness was there inside. I did seek help, but maybe it wasn't the right kind of help I was seeking. So nothing seemed to sort or solve my challenge. So that's when I said, okay, how do I go about this? And I started reading a lot of self-help books, doing a lot of work on my own self to process my traumas, to sit with it, to release it. And as I started doing that, I realized that a lot of there was a lot of calmness which started coming in. I started making sense of why this happened, or why that person came into my life, or why did certain things happen certain ways, why did I respond to certain triggers in a certain manner, like there was some anger or sadness or frustration or whatever, right? So it started making sense. I started connecting the dots, and that kind of brings you to yourself, and you're like more emotionally connected to yourself, and there's more inner peace in a sense. And then others around me started noticing that and asking, and then that's when Intracresco started, first unofficially and then officially starting to help people. And Kester and I, even before he came on board Intracresco, we worked very well together in a lot of different other projects which we were doing, and it just seemed right that for us to embark on this journey together. So maybe Kester can share more about his own journey with Intracresco. But in that sense, I've trained myself with a couple of therapy things and counseling things and all of that. So yeah, I'm going to keep that short.
Yeah, so I think for me, I was always searching for a deeper meaning in life, wondering what all the point of all this is about. And that search led me eventually to to read about various spiritual teachings. And I started doing various practices like mindfulness. And it gave me a lot of inner peace. And one day I just surrendered to the universe. I said, I I feel so much joy and love and peace, but I want to share this with other people. So show me how I can do that. And that was when I met Kavita, and it was just like a really synchronistic meeting. We got along very well, had the same ideas, and one thing led to the other. And yeah, now I think we're following our calling and our hearts. Desire to share what we have experienced with others. So this has not been, I think it has actually been the main training that we have done is actually in our own personal lives, because when we decided to embark on this journey, a lot of real life experiences surfaced, a lot of real life challenges, the past trauma from our own childhood, our past emotions that we've been carrying from past relationships and experiences all came out, and we had to work all that out within ourselves as well as between each other. So from there, we combine the practices that we had been trained in, such as various forms of therapy, together with validating them through our own real life experience. So what we share now is not just in theory of what we've studied, but really what we have put in practice in our own lives and we have found worked for us.
And also worked for many other people we have worked or journeyed with. Yeah.
Yeah. I honestly love the sound of how not only you both worked on each other, but also together as a couple too, because even in creating Intracresco, what I love listening, like for example with you, Kavitha, is how you just followed a lot of what was going on inside of you, from your intuition to figuring out, okay, there's this sadness inside of me, I need to figure this out. Also, I'm just going to pause and say hello to Benson, who's one of my clients who's just joined the live, so hello to him. And yeah, going back to what I was saying, Kavitha, it sounds like for you, a lot of what was going on was just following that trail of sadness, being like, okay, where is this coming from? Why am I reacting in certain ways to this? And becoming your best healer for yourself, in spite of not having like years of therapy experience behind you professionally or even personally. And it sounds very similar to what you've gone through, Kester, as well, because I remember reading your bio and you mentioning how you used to be a diplomat. You were looking for an awakening in order to get you to where you wanted to be. And that led you, as you mentioned, like having this almost coming to God moment of asking, like, what is my purpose? Where am I going? How can I help raise, I suppose, the vibration of the planet? And you two coming together in a very synchronous way, which I think is really beautiful. And I also think too, one thing I loved listening about both of you privately when we were speaking last time is how you consciously communicate. Because as I think Kavitha was saying, when you were talking about triggers and trauma, I think it's so easy for us to just react based on the patterns of behavior that we've had since we've grown up. And it can also cause us a lot of problems in, the way we respond to certain people, situations, opportunities. And it may ultimately be something that, prolongs in, for example, in your case, sadness, Kavitha. It may also continue to give you a sense of hopelessness, like you were explaining, Kester, as well, like just feeling like, okay, well, what is my purpose? And, I just feel like this isn't actually connecting with that too. So with today's topic, talking about conscious communication, I know that I've gone on record saying communication is challenging and it's not something that's very easy, because we underestimate how hard it is to actually be vulnerable and express our feelings to other people. What would be your definition of conscious communication, and what would an example of that look like, as opposed to, say, like a couple just talking about something?
Yeah. Conscious communication, like you rightly pointed out, is very, very, very challenging. Even we find
Yeah.
it challenging sometimes to consciously talk about what we are experiencing, or what we are going through, right? There's many facets to conscious communication, and um, the first thing is about conscious communication is to be able, that's a definition we found which kind of relates to what it is. It's to be able to communicate your thoughts and emotions from a space of awareness, right? Awareness being the key. For example, if a person is angry because maybe your partner did something or your parents did something and you're in that space of anger, you cannot communicate your thoughts and emotions from that space of anger. You first need to go figure out your anger. You first need to go and, come to a space where you're able to say, okay, I'm angry. I'm angry because. For that, you first need to work on removing that anger. Like,
Yes.
like so of course the best way to work through it is to do your own inner work, like mindfulness practices, or you could sit in meditation to reflect on what you're feeling, or therapy is another option. For deep-seated trauma, therapy is definitely a beautiful option, like you've also experienced probably with the people you're working. Yeah.
Every day.
So, so that there's no shortcut. For deep trauma, therapy is really needed, because you can sit with yourself for a certain degree, but beyond that, to face the truth, you kind of need your therapist to stand up for you and say, hey, what about this? Do you think about it this way or that way? Right? So
Yes.
conscious communication, the first thing about it would be to identify that you're not in a space to communicate consciously, or to communicate about your emotions and not let the emotions talk through you. A lot of times
Yes.
in relationships, whether it's a couple or whether it's parent and child or any kind of relationship, friends even, as a matter of fact, especially if you're like best buds, the emotion talks through you. Seldom you talk about your emotion. You're angry, you just like throw everything out, and then you're like, oh my God, why did I say that? I didn't mean it. Did I hurt my friend? Those kind of things. That's usually how it is. So it's probably to be in a space where you can tell that other person, look, I'm feeling angry now. I need to step out of this place. I'm going to leave. We'll continue this discussion another time. So it's to physically distance yourself from that trigger, right? And then you go and do whatever you need to do as an individual to calm yourself down. Like for me, it's sometimes I just need to walk out, go into the garden, walk on the grass, do some grounding, or sometimes it's just to meditate, or sometimes it's just to do regular housework, kind of in a mindless way. So then the mind is processing what's going on, the heart is processing, where did this hurt come from, what happened, what was the cause of it. So for me, like you said, because I've done a lot of my own work, I'm my own therapist, so I'm kind of processing it. But sometimes people may need to speak to somebody else to say, hey, okay, what happened, to make sense. Another thing which is very effective is journaling. Just to take a sheet of paper and write down all the thoughts, whatever comes, no filters, just write it down, read it, tear it, and throw it. Ideally, by the time you're done with that, you should be a lot calmer already. Then you can go back to the person and say, okay, I'm ready to talk. That would be a basic way of things. Of course, before you're ready to talk, maybe you want to think about what outcome do I want from this conversation. If you're just going to go and talk to say, like, I want to be right, I want to prove the other person wrong, then maybe you need to take more time off. To step away, because then you're still not in that conscious space. You're still letting that emotion talk through you. That the ego like wants to be right. So then it's like, okay, let me step away, wait, and then maybe to say, okay, what outcome do I want from this conversation? And then you could kind of set that intention with the person. You can say, it's not to prove who's right or who's wrong, but this is what I felt. So I just want to let you know, this is what I felt, this is how it was. but also ask that person for permission, like the other person, like, okay, are you in a space to listen to me? Do you need some time to cool down as well? Right? This is how I felt, but are you ready to listen to it? So that is very important as well. I think Kester can talk about conscious listening, which is a very important aspect of conscious communication.
Oh, yeah.
I think another way of defining conscious communication is communication with intention. You know,
Yes.
many times we communicate and we speak, but it's coming from a place where we are not so aware of why we are communicating, and we are just kind of reacting to the situation.
Yes. Yes.
So that creates disconnect sometimes, because we are trying to say something, but the other person might not be ready to receive it, or we might not be saying it in a way that the other person is able to receive it. So if we just set the intention for ourselves that the purpose of all communication that I do is for connection, not for disconnection, is to help me to understand someone better and for someone to understand me better, so we can be closer, rather than so that we can find out more of our differences and be more separate and apart. So
I can see your expressions.
It's so, I was going to say, the only reason I was reacting that way is because I know from a lot of the experience I've had individually, I mean, it's very easy for me to tell my clients what to do, but in the moment, sometimes, oh my goodness, it can be triggering for people because, you know, I know that I've had relationship dynamics where I have reacted from the emotion and I thought that was emotional availability, and it's like, no, it's not. I've had moments where I haven't had the intention to listen because the way the person's talking makes me feel attacked, and I'm just like, yeah, my ego's coming out to play now because I just don't feel safe to be a participant in this conversation. So, yeah, all I was going to say is it's very hard, I think, to get into this space because I think because of a lot of the childhood experiences we've had growing up, it was always, mum's right, dad's right, you're wrong, we know better than you, don't talk back to your parents, you shouldn't feel this way. And when you're given such gaslighty style of arguments and conversation, it kind of makes you want to either fight or flee and just not deal with people in that kind of way. And though the flee response is preferable sometimes, often what I find a lot of people do is they flee without explaining why they're running from the conversation. They're just kind of like, and I'm out, goodbye. And so, of course, that causes the other person to feel abandoned, the other person to feel like, oh my God, this person doesn't love me, which couldn't be further from the truth. It's just that they're overwhelmed. And I've actually had clients who've come to me telling me, oh, you know, my girlfriend, she's coming to me all the time with anger, and she just blows up at me, and I feel so attacked. And anytime I back away, she then becomes more, I don't want to say needy or clingy because I don't like those words, but she becomes more desperate to hold on to things because she becomes worried that I'm leaving her, and I don't want to be a bad boyfriend to her. And it's really quite sad because I think that a lot of people can sometimes be aware that they're doing these things, but they don't know or have regulation tools like meditation, going to the garden, or even journaling to just process the emotions without blowing up on someone, which has been their, I suppose, their default way of behaving. And I think in the cases of a lot of these individuals, they've grown up often with very sometimes narcissistic parents, people in their lives. And so all they know how to do is to fight and blow up other people, even if they know it's not the right way to go about it.
Or they've probably been in homes which is just toxic in general, where they've just seen that their parents that is just how the parents respond or react to things, and they kind of think that is the default way of doing things. I mean, I totally agree with what you say. It's nicely put.
Yeah, I think one way of understanding conscious communication is that it is a connection. It is an emotional connection that you have with someone. So if you respond with anger, it's disconnecting someone because you are kind of in a way aggressively pushing your point of view to that person. But
Yes.
you withdraw, it is also not conscious communication because you're disconnecting from that person. You're withdrawing in order to keep yourself safe or to preserve
Yes.
the peace. But it's still disconnect at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So silence could be connect or disconnect. You know, silence when it's about being present with someone is connecting, but silence when you're avoiding someone is disconnect. So
Yes.
it's a very subtle difference. Even though on the surface it might seem like what you're doing is helping the relationship, but if you think about it from the heart level, are you connected to your partner or not? That's the key question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to add to that, Kester, by saying when you're connected to the heart, my brain was thinking, I think one of the problems people have in that context is they're always thinking about, you know, the peace of the relationship. And my answer is, quite honestly, fuck that. Where's your peace? Because I think that so often people are so worried about the opinions of other people and being judged, being hurt, being attacked. It's like, yeah, I don't care about that. How are you feeling right now? And what do you need to tell that person in order to inform them, you know, that this isn't feeling comfortable for you? And what do you need to restore yourself to peace? Because I think that a lot of the time, as you were pointing out, Kester, people want to play peacekeeper. They don't want to rock the boat. And even if there is someone who is being passive aggressive and being angry and coming out of anger, they don't necessarily want to destroy the relationship either. In fact, they're often doing that in a almost like unconscious manipulative way to try and keep the relationship together. And I think that the problem is because neither of those people in those situations are actually communicating about how they feel. What they're doing, as you said, is reacting out of emotion. And I think that the problem can be that if you've got two people who are unconsciously communicating like that, it does erode a relationship so fast. It breeds contempt. It means that you're probably going to have cheating or some other horrible things happen in your relationship. And I think that it's a real quick recipe for disaster because you're just throwing your trauma behavior out at people without addressing what the core things are. For instance, I think that one thing I've seen a lot with couples when they fight is they almost like leave it to the last minute sometimes. They'll almost like let it explode in a glorious fashion. And picking up the pieces from that is so much harder than addressing it when you feel there's something wrong before you've got all this anger inside of you, before you have all this overwhelm and you're like, I don't want to deal with this. And I think that's the struggle for so many people is they're afraid to actually speak up for themselves.
Yes, a lot of people, like you rightly said, people fear conflict, right? It's probably because of childhood patterning, right? It kind of is like, you know, as a child, you either agree with what your parents say or you're a bad girl or a bad boy. So as a child, you kind of, you know, your brain programs that I better agree with what mommy or daddy or whoever the elder in the room is, then I will be accepted by them because children crave acceptance. It's as simple as that. Children crave acceptance. So as a child, you kind of learn that, oh, I better agree with what the other person is saying and I better not fight with that person. So that's kind of what's going on. So that's why even as an adult, what that translates to is as an adult, you don't want to go into a conflict situation. So when a conflict happens, you're either I need to prove myself, that is fight, or I want to just keep quiet and kind of withdraw and kind of run away in your own sense, or I'm going to freeze. That's the third thing I've noticed people doing, they freeze. That's something I've noticed, you know, in Kester also. That's something we realize as a third thing, freeze, right? So they don't know what to say and you don't know what to do in that situation. So people usually go to so it's first to identify, I think, even before going to communicate in a conscious way, is for you to identify as an individual. What is your default response to a moment of conflict? Is your response fight? Is your response to run away? Or is your response freezing? Sometimes people can have one of two responses. Like for me, I identified that my default response is fight. And if when I fight, things are not heard, then I'll run away. So that is my default. So I first fight, and if things don't work, then I'm like, okay, I want to leave. Right. So that was identifying that and communicating that with Kester helps, because next time when I'm in an emotionally disturbed state, he kind of knows at the back of his mind, this is her default. And then he kind of knows, okay, what should I do? How should I hold space for her? Should I just let her be until she comes? So, conscious communication, you kind of set the ground rules with whoever is, for example, in our case, as his partners. Even when you are in a calm situation, you don't set the rules while you have that argument, right? So you kind of
No.
talk about it. You say, okay, last time we had this disagreement. Let us analyze what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, right? So when you analyze, you kind of realize that, okay, what was my default response? So for me, I know I fight, and if fight doesn't work, I will run away. Like for Kester, we realized it was he'll either freeze or
I will withdraw. So for me, it's appeasing the other person or
Yeah.
going to my cave. Yeah.
It's interesting you should say pleasing, because when you were saying please, my brain instantly thought sometimes there's even a fourth response, which is like the fawn response, which is that people pleasing response too. Sorry to interrupt, Kester. Please keep going.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think it's a way of like kind of trying to quickly diffuse that the tension, because you can't take it like because
No.
or because you want to or because of, I mean, even your own belief system, because you believe that when someone thinks say something negative about you, you think that it's it's a reflection of your self-worth, so you
Yes.
immediately want to prove that you are worthy, and you say no, okay, I will do what you want me to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we figured that out, that kind of helps. So when there is a moment of, some sort of conflict, then he's withdrawn. I know that he's not withdrawn because he wants to run away from me. He's not withdrawn because he doesn't want to address the situation. I just know he's withdrawn because he's kind of processing what went on inside. So when he is ready, then we'll talk. So that kind of, you see, what happens in a conflict is, if one person is fighting, one person withdraws. The person who's fighting, like you rightly mentioned, keeps fighting because they kind of want the other person to react back. If the other person responds, you at least know that the relationship is going on, right? But if the person withdraws so much, the person who's in the fight mode is kind of afraid that this person is going to leave them.
Correct.
That is just how human nature is. So then knowing that both our responses in a moment of conflict is different really helps, because then I can tell myself, he's not leaving, he needs time to process. You go process your emotions as well. So this is setting the ground rules among whether it's parents, any kind of relationship. For it to flourish, it's to sit in a time of when you're calm, when you're collected, and say, okay, let us analyze these things, let us process these things, let us see what is our default method of communication. How do you respond to a moment of conflict, for example, right? Saying that, I must say that it is good sometimes to have healthy arguments among relationships, couples, because that way you kind of realize where one is emotionally supporting the other, or where the other needs more support, or what works, what doesn't work, and things like that. So there's a cleaning truck on the road in case you guys pick it up. Just fast. Okay.
Yeah. I was going to say too, like, I feel like a lot of this is just learning as well. Like, I think that, for instance, though I haven't been in partnership for very long in my past, I'm mostly been single most of my life. I feel like what I've had to practice on is my friendships and also my family relationships. So I think one thing I'm going to say off the back of that, Kavitha, is it's messy. Like, it's easy to talk about how, we can consciously communicate, but I think that you almost have to screw it up a few times to be like, okay, I know I'm reacting out of anger now. That's not healthy. And I know that I'm not necessarily doing what I would like to do, but it's okay. I forgive myself for being clumsy. And at least I acknowledge that I'm on the path to doing this. I remember the first time I set a boundary with someone. Oh, that didn't feel great. Like, I had so many feelings with that. I remember saying to a friend of mine who was like, it was just a toxic relationship, something to the effect of, listen, when you do this, it makes me feel upset, angry. I'd appreciate it going forward if you don't do this. He couldn't handle it, and it escalated into I'm right, you're wrong. Let's just not talk about this. Let's just pretend it doesn't exist.
No.
And the relationship disintegrated pretty quickly after that. But it was one of those things where I think looking back on that experience, I'm glad I did that for practice. It did definitely highlight for me that that was a relationship I no longer wanted to be part of as friends. And I think that it's one of those things where you almost have to go into it expecting disappointment as an outcome, because if you're having boundaries with someone, you're having conscious communication with someone. Also, hey, Tiffany, lovely to see you. I think that one of the problems is we go into it sometimes thinking, oh, you know, when I say this, my partner's going to be agreeable with me. They're going to transform. They're going to do exactly what I say. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Like, they've got their own trauma responses to that thing too. They may not be ready for a conversation like that. And I've got to ask both of you, like, you know, what happens, do you feel, in terms of having this conscious communication with people and getting to a place where, you know, you have to make a call for yourself individually to be like, is this going to work out? Because I have experienced times where I've tried consciously communicating with people and things have just not gotten better. And I've had to draw the line somewhere and be like, this isn't healthy for my emotional well-being. I need to call it quits for myself. Like, do you feel like do you have like a system whereby you're going like, okay, I can see that this is getting better and things are more at peace? Or do you have like a one chance only policy? Like, what are the boundaries you have for yourself individually that help you to determine whether you should stay or whether you should go off the back of your conscious communication?
That's a hard one to answer. You see, humans, we never came with some sort of instruction manual like, okay, do this, doesn't work, do that, do this. It's constant learning, right? So you're evolving also as an individual, emotionally, in your own relationship with yourself. What you feel is right today, you may not feel is right 10 years from now, because your thinking process changes, you as an individual change. I think for me, when I go into a conversation with guest or with anybody, I first tell myself in my mind, it's not my responsibility to fix the other person. It's not my responsibility to get the other person to agree with what I say. My responsibility is quite simply to myself and to communicate in a calm, collected manner what I felt, and to try to align the conversation to an objective which we set. Of course, if it goes really off the objective which I have preset, like Kester mentioned, intention, you know, okay, the cleaning truck is back again. It's just going fast. Reminds me of what is that in Tayo Station? I don't know if anyone knows Tayo Station. There's Cleanie, the cleaning truck. So that truck went by that way. Anyways, so it's in a conversation to know what are your limits also. For that kind of comes with you knowing yourself better, having that relationship with yourself first. So if you know that, okay, beyond, if it goes off agenda, and if you start going into a boundary of, say, anger or sadness or self-blame, then it's better to withdraw from that conversation. But don't just run away. Tell the person, look, I think the conversation is not going the way we set an intention, right? So setting an intention at the start, getting the other person to kind of at least agree to it, kind of helps keep the relationship intact. So something which I practice with Kester is, if I want to talk to him about something which I'm not happy about, for instance, instead of saying something like, this is something a lot of women like to do. Yeah, we need to talk.
I knew you were going to use that example. It's such an infamous thing to do, because it's like throwing a grenade at someone. And it's just like, oh God, like, I don't want to go anywhere near that. Please continue. That was great.
And then the man is like, what do we need to talk about? What did I do wrong? Oh my God. And he starts to panic. And then the minute you say, we need to talk, he's like on his guard, on his defense, kind of in the cave, almost wanting to withdraw. So what I found works better is to instead say something like, I would like, when we are both able to, I would like for us to have a conversation on A, B, C. So at least saying this, and this, at least the man, because men's mind is analytical. You see, the way a man thinks and the way a woman thinks is different. Women are more emotional response oriented. So we think kind of from the space of emotions. Men default mechanism is thinking logically, analyzing thoughts. So if you as a woman want to communicate something with someone who is a man in your house, it could be a father, it could be a brother, it could be one of your guy friends or even your partner, then it's better to tell them, okay, I would like to talk to you about this, this, and this. Then the man is like, okay, I'm prepared now because it's these three
Yes.
areas. And also to say something like, when you are available or when you are free, instead of just forcing yourself, then you're kind of asking the person for permission. That's a respect, as a matter of respect for both parties.
Yeah.
That's from me. Like, wonder
Yeah.
what you
I think in terms of deciding when to walk away and when to engage, I think it's not helpful to think of it as a science, as you know, like, oh, I have a certain criteria and I stick to it all the time, because that's a very mind-based intellectual way of approaching it, and it requires both logic as well as feeling. So I think some of the most explosive arguments that I've had were people who I have become so much closer to right now. And so it doesn't mean that the more explosive a relationship is, the less you should stay. Because the most explosive relationships could be the ones that are the most meaningful. You know, the one where you actually learn the most about each other and grow, where you can grow the most. So I think for me, it's really about an underlying level of commitment to the relationship. So you might have an explosive argument with someone, but if someone is, you know that someone's left deep inside, someone has that commitment to the relationship that, you know, no matter what happens on the surface, whether we argue, whether we throw each other out of the house, or how much we fight, we know we're here to stay. You know, we want this thing to work. So I think for me, that's very important. Like, whatever happens in a relationship, if there's that level of commitment, I feel it is worth investing my effort.
Yeah. And sometimes, in a relationship, we can't expect to resolve everything the first time or second
Oh
time,
God, no.
third time. It is that commitment to know that everybody involved in it wants to make it better. Right. So as long as there is communication, it's fine because a relationship is still going on. Once that communication dies away, that's when you kind of have to worry what's going on with that relationship. So even if it's someone with anger, the relationship still responds to you in a sarcastic way or whatever, at least if you're committed, the first people in the relationship are committed, that it's okay, the person's angry, let's get back to this next time. And a lot of current life trauma when people are working with, usually people have a lot of current life trauma with parents, a lot of times with parents. Siblings, yeah, but not so much. Usually it's the parents. Usually it's trauma accumulated before the age of 7 even. And a lot of time this trauma is not in a conscious awareness. It's there, it's inner child work you need to do. It's somewhere there, but you don't know about it unless you really sit to do that work with yourself. And then the stuff comes out. Then you're like, oh, why do I have trust issues with guys who come into my life? Or why do I respond this way? Because when I was 3 or 4, I heard my parents say this. So the subconscious mind kind of remembers everything. It keeps track of every single thing which happens. Some of the clients I've worked with, the trauma even goes back to the time when they were in the womb of the mother, for example.
Yeah.
That's inner baby, that's trauma, that's the fetal trauma. So to say that the fetus does not know, the fetus remembers, it has memory. So it's really, knowing all of that and knowing where you're coming from. It requires a strong connection with yourself. And when you know that you have that kind of a strong connection with another person, then you kind of try to empathize with the fact that they come with their own set of trauma. We don't know what kind of inner child trauma they carry or inner baby trauma they carry. I was just talking about the present life, right? And then what kind of trauma they may have accumulated in school, for example. Sometimes people don't even know about these things. So to have that empathy for that other person, to know that, okay, maybe the person is responding from that space, it requires um, a great sense of awareness for yourself as an individual, to know what your strengths are, to know what your weaknesses are, to know that no matter what, you love yourself. So being there for yourself is the first thing, not looking for other people to validate that sense of love.
Yeah, I love what both of you have said on so many levels, because I think one thing that really resonated with me with what you were saying, Peter, is we need to have really strong awareness of ourselves and also allow ourselves to be kind to ourselves too if we're not even aware of some of that subconscious trauma. Because you're right, if there's trauma from a womb because, you know, the epigenetics of being born while a mum had trauma in her life influenced our development, of course, we're not responsible for that, in the sense that we're not to blame for having that experience happen to us. It is a shame that we have to be the ones to take care of that, though, because a lot of this healing work is unfortunately, you know, taking care of someone else's responsibilities or lack thereof on our emotional well-being and development. And I think that, you know, without going down that rabbit hole, what I loved about what you were saying, Kavitha, is it sounds to me like as long as we are aware of what our emotional well-being is, we're taking care of our side of the street and able to consistently communicate that to our partner, linking to what Kester was saying, and continue to communicate, then it shows evidence that this relationship is still worth investing in, and that just because, you know, you might have explosive moments between each other, it sounds to me, what I love from hearing, particularly what Kester was saying, is allow yourself to have those explosive moments as long as you're able to come back together and communicate about what happened. That's the key thing. And it's something that I've definitely noticed across my clients who've gotten into partnership is the ones who are able to do the work really well with a partner are the ones when there is an argument or there's something wrong. They just have those hard conversations straight away and talk about it, because it's really quite sad to see one partner shut down, not want to deal with it, or worse, they're in an abusive situation where they're trying to talk,
Yes.
and it's just clearly not working out because the dynamic is clearly not working. So I guess the question for both of you, you know, when we talk about relationships that have conscious communication, I think the element that I think is really important there is emotional availability, that capacity to register what you're feeling and be able to clearly articulate it to the other person without fear of what they might think and say. And I think that that's a really powerful thing for all of us to embody. So, question, how can we know if we're in a relationship which is not emotionally available and doesn't actually have the capacity to provide us with conscious communication?
You want to take that, shall I take it?
Yeah, I think you have some experience.
Oh yeah, I remember you mentioning your experience with this, Kavitha.
I'm laughing because, yeah, that's a very hard one. I think for a lot of women, to kind of discern when a relationship is worth keeping, especially in a partner relationship. But I would like to extend it to also parents, and when to kind of restrict or stop that particular relationship, right? It's for women basically because we get emotionally involved with the person, and it's very hard to kind of just break away. It takes a lot of time for uh, for a woman as such to kind of emotionally disconnect, because once you are in a relationship, you kind of emotionally connect with the person. You only go into a relationship if you're able to emotionally connect. For
100%,
women,
but many people don't.
so you see, when you want to like get out, like one of my previous relationships was a toxic one, right? And when you are in a relationship like that, it's very hard to know that it is toxic because there's a lot of manipulation involved. A lot of times it comes, especially if it's a kind of like a narcissistic relationship, the narcissist would usually, the nature of the person is to gaslight the other person, and at the end of it, to make the other person feel like it is his or her mistake. Right, so that was what was happening to me, right? So I was being gaslighted left, right, center, and at the end of it, it always felt like it was made to be my mistake.
Yeah.
And then, if you know narcissists, they go in a cycle like that. Or any toxic relationship, it goes in a cycle like that. So there's a moment when everything is going well, nice, good, and then you're like emotionally kind of healing yourself as the recipient, and you're like, okay, the relationship is fine, it's going okay, things are good, this person is being nice to me, and then a trigger happens, and then you go down in the downward spiral. The abuse happens. A lot of times emotional abuse is harder because you can't prove it to anybody outside, but that emotional abuse is what leaves the deepest scars in terms of trauma. It can take a person many years to overcome that. So I'm still working on overcoming some of that deep embedded trauma from that relationship. So when you go down in a narcissistic relationship or any toxic relationship, that's when the emotional, sometimes physical, a lot of times emotional evolves to physical abuse, starts to happen. A lot of times if the person, the toxic person, especially the narcissist, sometimes they would make the other person do things like get angry and kind of, out of anger throw things, or and then they say, see, I was talking calmly, you were the one who threw things, so it's your mistake.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes that way, and then the person says, I had to do that because you did this, you see, it's your mistake, and then
See what you made me do. Yeah.
yeah, and then you keep going up, you're like, oh, it's my mistake, I should get better, I should get different, and then the person will come along, say, it's okay, I forgive you for the mistake you did, let's try working this out again, and then the cycle continues. When you are stuck in a cycle like that, it's very hard to know when to step out, because when you're going down, you want to step out, but then the up happens and you're like doubting yourself, your reality is altered greatly. So for me to get out of that, I had to go into many of those cycles for a few years. In fact, it was very hard until I spoke to someone outside, a neutral party outside, someone whom I could trust. And when I spoke to that person, it wasn't like I went to the person saying, I'm a bad person, please help me fix my relationship. That was how I went to the person, because that was how badly my mind was manipulated to thinking that it was my mistake.
Yeah.
And then the person heard it, and thankfully that person was, for me, was like a savior, because she put everything into context for me. She's a very elderly lady, she's very close to my heart now. She actually sat, and then she told me, she said, my dear, this is what's happening, do you notice that cycle? And then I felt that inner peace. When I heard it, I was like, now I know what's wrong. It's not my mistake, it's just that the relationship is going that way. And a narcissist is someone you cannot fix, right?
No.
A lot of times when a woman or when a man, whoever, thinks that, oh, this, okay, now I've identified the pattern, I'm going to try to fix my partner because I love my partner. Now, if it's just a toxic relationship and if you're deeply committed and the other person is willing to change, you can try. But you kind of need to ask yourself, what is my boundary? How far can I go? Right? And with narcissists, they kind of fall in a special category where you can't change them. Even if they want to change themselves, it's very hard. So if you're willing to live in that kind of a relationship, willing to go through the cycle, or willing to be so thick-skinned that you always respond to the person and don't react to the cues they put out, then it's possible to stay in a relationship like that. But it's going to be like walking on eggshells or on glass bottles every single day.
Yeah, and I wanted to come in on that to say that I love everything you said. And I think one thing that is so important to realize for people who are listening to this is that with narcissistic relationships or any kind of toxic relationship like that, it does so much damage to your emotional well-being over time. It's kind of like the cancer of relationships, in that it's
Yes.
just going to make you feel worse.
Yes.
It's going to impact your health and well-being. Your mind is not your own. You'll start to have short-term memory loss. You'll probably develop chronic pain, irritable bowel syndrome, a lot of anxiety, possibly depression as well.
Yes.
And I think that people, you know, out of respect to people who want to stay into that, true, they can have thick skin. And I want to say, out of compassion to those individuals, if they choose to do this, they're welcome to do that, understanding that the consequences of that will be it does not get any better ever. And to expect the worst, because honestly, it's never a pretty picture. And as you said, like, the abuse has the potential to, you know, become physical if it was only emotional or mental. You know, it just is going to continue to become more exploitative over time if those boundaries aren't set. So I think, you know, on one hand, you've got these abusive relationships of which are one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got these conscious partners who are over here. And I think the disconnect between, you know, these two kinds of relationships, I think, is consciousness and also the ability to have boundaries. Because I think that in this one, many people are very unconscious in these sort of dynamics. They can develop codependent patterns where it's like, oh, I want to save the other person. And so that's how they get stuck. And I know many men and women who are in those kind of situations. Then in this sort of like space in between, what I have often noticed is very emotionally unavailable experiences, which is where you often have one partner who might be more anxious, the other partner is more of an avoidant, if we're going to use that language. And as a consequence, they have these really emotionally unavailable dynamics where neither of them are communicating with each other. They're talking, but they're not communicating about their feelings. And so they get stuck into just having these almost paternal behaviors, it's not paternal, parent behaviors in their relationships. And I find that in those kinds of cases, the love can erode very quickly over time. And similar to what you were saying about a narcissistic relationship, though it may not have the same toxic cycle, it has its own dangerous patterns too, because both partners may never actually feel in love with one another, yet they stay because they're worried about what other people might think of them. They're worried about, you know, leaving the other person. I've heard of stories of these people where, you know, one will go off and cheat with someone else, they'll try and fix it, or maybe they'll leave only to come back together again to try and work on it because they haven't processed any of the emotions that are going on. So I find in those cases, those individuals, bless them, don't have the skill set sometimes or even the tools to emotionally regulate themselves and to ask the question, which is, what do I need for myself in a relationship? And it's because there's a real lack of boundaries and also a lack of emotional communication. That's where the struggle happens, I've noticed, for them. But then, as we were describing with the conscious relationships, like, you know, between you two, for instance, it sounds to me like you can have these explosive conversations with people, and yet you can still sit down with one another and go, okay, I admit I took ownership of what happened back there. So, you know, it happened. And I want to talk about it because I didn't like how it felt, or, you know, I didn't like the way it made you feel. And it happened. And so I just want to explain my responsibility for what happened there and also talk about this so it doesn't happen as often or more frequently again. And I get the impression from that, because I know I've experienced this too, when you've got two parties working together to consistently work on their triggers and their trauma, I have found the emotional connection deepens because you don't have to worry about necessarily, are they going to leave? Are they going to hit me? You know, are we going to have another toxic cycle? It's more just, no, I know that if something happens, we'll talk about it. And I can trust myself to own up for my side of the street. And ultimately, it comes down to how I communicate my needs and also my behavior to them, so that way they're aware of how I'm showing up. And one thing that I loved about the example you shared in terms of like how to communicate your needs off the back of a fight was like, set a date, set a time, talk about what you're going to talk about. I've done that with clients too, and they find it works really, really well because everyone's present and wants to talk about it. And I think that a lot of people think they're communicating when they have these conversations, but as you said, they're reacting out of emotion. And I think that it's so, honestly, I think relationships are hard. People think that, you know, it should be easy, and sometimes they can be, but they're not. But to be honest, they're not, because you're digging up a lot of old stuff that hasn't been taught to us, and a lot of stuff that hasn't actually been given to us in a way that's healthy.
You see, a lot of times the thing that relationship is like a fairy tale kind of plays out
Yes.
because of Disney, the kind of Disney movies we watch, or oh yeah, you know, you're kind of raised to think that you need to get married. You know, that is like kind of celebrated, that event, but nobody along the line says, you know, it is constant work in a relationship. Till the deathbed, I think you have to constantly keep working. That is very, very important. I think Hester has something to add.
Yeah, and I think there's no formula that works all the time. So, I mean, even between both of us, we have tried these techniques and they have not worked. For example, I mean, there are times when we try to share consciously, right? Oh, I felt this way when you did this, and you know, I think I felt this way because of, you know, my own triggers, and these were the thoughts that were running through my mind from an observer point of view, not from unconscious space. But even sharing that way could trigger the other person, and sometimes you also have to make a call on, you know, is this going anywhere, or should we really have it another time?
Yes.
And so it's constantly learning, and it doesn't mean that just because you follow like a fixed formula that worked the last time, it will work again the next time. So that's the, in a way, the challenge, but also the beauty of relationships, because you keep on learning and you keep on getting better at it.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. And I think too, the other value of this as well is that as you connect more with yourself and your own needs, I think you start to find people who are very similar to you as well. It just happens because your energy changes. You're no longer in survival mode. You appear, you know, much more grounded. And so you're not often drawn to people who are more emotionally unavailable, charismatic, toxic. You're more connecting with people who are more authentic. So I think that the consequence of that can be that, you know, a lot of the learning that you've taken along the way serves you with the people that you will then go on to meet down the road too. And I think that we've created this narrative in our head of being like, oh, well, there's only one. We only have one soulmate, which is not in fact true. We have many seasons to our relationships. And the two things that I want to say about that is I think we often come out of a place of scarcity, which stops us from actually voting for ourselves and being like, well, as you said, Kester, like, is this actually suiting my needs? Like, you know, I'm doing all the things that advocate for myself, but is this going anywhere? And I think that that's only something that we can ask ourselves and answer over time. And it's only with enough time that we can be like, okay, my instinct was right. This isn't going in anywhere. I need to choose what's best for me. And that can be a tough call to make. And the other thing I was going to say too is sometimes, this is something I've learned too in my life, it's actually better to let a relationship, however small or long, actually end in order to allow space for potentially it to come back again without the intention of necessarily wanting to return after that. And I'll explain why I say this is because I think a lot of times people are scared to leave or to end a relationship because they think they're a failure. And the way I look at it now is very much that sometimes the season of a relationship has well and truly ended. You're hurting. It's not feeling good. You haven't been feeling good for a while. And you've tried expressing what your needs are or what you need in order to feel safe, seen, and heard, and it's just not happening. You're far better off just, in my opinion, honoring what your body needs. And if it means leaving, there is a far better chance that in leaving someday down the road, that individual may actually be healthier, you know, later down the line to actually come back to you. But trying to pull teeth with this individual and trying to get them to come with you when they clearly can't, I mean, good luck. It's just, you've got to rely on the evidence that you have if that person's willing to come on the same journey as you.
Sometimes, you know, sorry.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to be very self-aware that whether you are making that decision from an emotional space or from a centered space, a considered space. Because then there could be times when we are feeling the full intensity of the emotion, and if we make that decision from that space, it could be one that is not not so balanced.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I think that when I'm talking about this is when you've had enough evidence to suggest that things aren't necessarily feeling good. It's not,
Yeah.
I'm going to react to the first red flag and leave. It's like, no, I'm going to talk this through with my partner and say, listen, this isn't feeling good to me. I want to talk about this. But I think if you're consciously aware that you've been having this conversation for a while and you just still feel the same way, it's kind of like, okay, now I'm starting to feel frustrated, contempt, annoyed because, you know, my needs aren't being met. And so I think that's when the conversation then needs to be, you know, dialed in with ourselves and be like, okay, well, you know, how long am I willing to give myself to continue with this experience?
Yes. Yes.
But then I like what you said about how when both sides are staying in the relationship because they are afraid of being disconnected from the relationship, that's when the motivation for the relationship is fear rather than love. So I think it's important to understand that. I think we actually went through an experience like that where I think we felt like we were holding on to it because of fear and just separating for a while and coming back to ourselves and what we want.
Yes.
And then coming back together again helps to realign ourselves and to ensure that we are in this thing because we really want it from a space of, this is for my best interest and because I really love this person rather than because I'm afraid of losing this
I
relationship.
love that you shared that, Kester, because I think that's so important in that sometimes having that space and just allowing that phase or that season to come to an end, just to sort of like allow yourself to come back to yourself is so healthy and important because if you don't do that, I think one of two things can happen. You prolong a dead season and it's summer, that's winter, we've moved on from that place. And it may actually make it worse, which is not healthy for both parties. But the other thing too is if you take that space and you allow yourself to realign with yourself and be like, okay, my intentionality is love, not fear, and you come back to that with that intention and it works, amazing. Much harder to do that though if you're still prolonged in that fear-based state and you don't have a grounded sense inside of yourself. And even if it doesn't work out when you come back to it, at least you can say, well, I've confirmed my intuition that this was something that I needed to separate myself from because it wasn't serving me. And I think when we become our best self-leaders by recognizing, okay, what do I need to do in order to advocate for myself with my partner and communicate with them where things aren't out of alignment, at least then you can say, either we're a team player or we're not.
Yeah, yeah. And I think taking that a step behind, right? The first thing before, usually people enter a relationship, if they enter a relationship from an unconscious space, usually go into it from a need. Like you kind of want your partner to fulfill your unmet needs.
Oh, God, yes.
So I think the first thing you could do to yourself or your own self to take care of yourself is to first feel whole and complete in yourself. To know yourself well, to say, okay, let me be that need provider for myself. Let me love myself first. It kind of goes contrary to what we were told as kids. Put yourself last, love others first. No, that doesn't work. It's more like I need to love myself first. When I love myself, when I know myself well, then I can love others from that space of fullness, from that space of wholeness. I'm not loving or holding on to somebody else from lack or from need. There's a big difference. Right? Yeah.
I want to add to that, Kavitha, too, by saying I love everything you said and I completely agree with it. I think what I've noticed, too, as an unconscious pattern in a lot of us is that a lot of the people that we often seek out will have those needs that we think we need for ourselves. They have the money, they have the looks, they have the personality. And the problem with that is often we're looking for a version of ourselves in that other person. And it's a really great symptom of disconnection from ourselves because we're looking for others, as you said, to fill our gaps. And that's a great start in a journey to be like, okay, well, they're not your everything. You have to be your everything. So what do you need to do for yourself in order to fill those holes up? Because you can't expect someone to do that for you. And it's just not a healthy place to be coming from.
Yes. Like when I separated from that toxic relationship, I had to sit with myself for a long period of time, work with
I
myself,
bet.
release a big portion of that trauma, become my own best friend before I could even think of another relationship, for example. So that pause was healthy for me. That is something which I'd like to, whoever's listening to us or whoever listens to this later, don't rush from one relationship to another. First sit with your what went wrong in the previous relationship, what went right, what can you learn from it, how can you become a better person, how can you be full and whole in yourself, and then from that space you will attract another person who's whole, complete, and full in themselves. And then you already have the base for conscious communication or a conscious relationship in general. That's so much better. Yeah.
I 100% agree with you. I 100% agree with you. And I think that's why it's so important to almost go through these experiences. I often tell people, like, better off being hurt and looking back now, whatever age we're at, and being like, okay, I feel a bit silly. And at least I've learned my lessons from that experience. Like, I had a client yesterday at 38 saying to me, well, I feel a bit silly because, I haven't got it right. And I said to him, that's okay. You didn't know what you didn't know. And no one intentionally gets into bad relationships or is rejected by people who they like or gets into toxic partnerships. It happens because we've been groomed a certain way from childhood. We haven't been given this education. As you said, literature was all about put others first, make them feel good before yourself. And so I think a lot of this process to conscious communication and having, healthier relationships where it just continues to be optimized is, as you said, starting with ourselves and then working out from there. Anyways, I'm going to wrap up because I'm going to say I think that's time for Instagram before they kick us off. But I just wanted to say, Kavitha and Kesta, thank you so much for having this conversation with me on conscious communication, because it's hard and at the same time it's such an important skill set to learn in relationships. So thank you so much for coming on today. Just for people who are listening, where can people find you if they want to reach out and get to know what you're doing?
They can find us on our social media handles. It's at Introcresco, and they can just look us up at Instagram, or they can go over to our website, introcresco.com, or we're not very active on Facebook, I must say, but we're kind of active on YouTube. So those are some platforms. But Instagram would be the best place. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Instagram and our website are the two main places you can reach out to us.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're always happy to hear from you. So reach out to us. If you're interested in any of our offerings or just for a chat,
Yes.
DM us or drop us an email.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Ken, thank you so much for this lovely call. I think we've learned quite a lot also in having this conversation with you. It's been very, very enlightening, and we had fun in this conversation. Yeah.
I'm really glad. Look, honestly, I love listening to both of you so much, especially off the back of our when we met privately. And I think you're both inspiring in what you've worked on together and how you're creating, a healthy sounding relationship with conscious communication, because I know it's not easy. And I think that it's wonderful to have both of you, working through trauma, working through your triggers and actually coming together, because I think this is what we should be celebrating. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that both of you are able to share your wisdom with other people in helping them to work through their own emotional baggage, to just connect back with themselves. And then, if need be, they can then enter into a relationship that feels right for them, rather than coming out of that, as you mentioned, unconscious place of wanting their needs in someone else, which is not healthy. But anyways, Kavitha and Kesta, thank you. I love that. I'd be very happy to connect with you again on any format, whether it be a live or just to catch up with both of you, because I love both of you very much. And yeah, I got a lot of value out of this too.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah.
No, thank you both. It was wonderful. I loved chatting with you. I'll see you guys next time, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah,
you too.
same here. Bye bye.
Bye bye.